Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? Can the federal government counterfeit trillions of dollars a year that have no value and then arrest and imprison the nonviolent among us for creating or using coins that do have real value? Tonight, enemies, foreign and domestic. After the end of the Cold War, the federal government found itself for the first time in generations in a position where no single person, nation, or entity could be demonized to make excuses for its limitless military adventurism and unchecked growth at home. Even though communism died like a dinosaur that was too obese and lethargic to get up and find food, as recently as during the Reagan years, the specter of communism was sufficient for increasing the size of the government and fueling the ravenous military-industrial complex interests so as to provide cover for domestic welfare programs that basically just redistributed wealth from those who earn and have to those who don't earn and want. The idea was if we're going to be spending billions on increasing our military, then we had to compromise and compensate with more billions to be redistributed to wealthy corporations and the politicians' favorite interest groups. Following the collapse of communism, the government lacked a single entity against which to stir up fear and hatred so as to convince Americans that looting and pillaging the federal treasury was necessary. Enter 9/11. The post-9/11 fear-mongering of a terrorist in every airplane or sleeper cells in every town was sufficient to make Americans surrender their liberties and their paychecks under the guise of keeping us safe. No one stopped to question, and certainly no one in the Congress even to read, the Civil Liberties Shredding Patriot Act. Remember this? We fought the American Revolution against England in large measure because the King's soldiers could legally write their own search warrants. Did you know this? The Patriot Act lets federal agents write their own search warrants. Our post-9/11 fear and trembling also facilitated the police state-like Department of Homeland Security with all the porn and grope thugs at the airport. Now, under the guise of terrorism, the big government party could finally bring its plans for constant war into fruition. And the economist John Maynard Keynes' vision of economic central planning could finally be completed. But Keynes' erroneous theories that government spending can stimulate the economy and that war and destruction bring prosperity are profoundly offensive and utterly wrong. Just listen to the victims of the recent earthquakes and tsunami in Japan, who've been told by the Keynesian economists that they should be happy for their destruction. And watch their reactions. Even economists like the New York Times' Paul Krugman argued that the destruction of the World Trade Centers could, quote, do some economic good. These big government planners are not only heartless, they're crazy. But war and stimulus and government spending do not do any economic good. For if we must pay for a broken window, we don't have the money that the window cost to spend on other things of our free choosing. But there is some hope. Keynes' big government theories were proven wrong by a man who demonstrated that capitalism requires savings before investment. He argued that when central banks print worthless currency, they are the counterfeiters. That the Constitution requires that only gold and silver can constitute real money, and that only gold and silver truly hold their value against the government counterfeiters who have taken control of our monetary policy. This man won the Nobel Prize in economics for his stalwart defense of sound money and no government borrowing. But if he were alive today, by the federal government's own perverse definitions, he would be lumped into the same category as our guest earlier in the show tonight, whom the feds called an economic terrorist for minting coins that didn't even resemble the government's. The Nobel Prize winner is the ideological heart of the Tea Party, whose book The Road to Serfdom Glenn Beck made an overnight bestseller. It's the Tea Party's Bible. It was written by Friedrich Hayek. He's the godfather of the Tea Party. He and Thomas Jefferson both argued that if the government is the only entity in society that can issue money, then we are not only deprived of good money, but because the government can control the value of its money, we're also deprived of freedom. The government conviction of Bernard von Nothaus is the perfect example of the financial elites in Washington not wanting Americans to know what is good money for fear they might break free of the government-controlled money. Just imagine how free you would be if you could reject the worthless paper money the Federal Reserve prints and use something of your own choosing that had real value, like gold or silver, for all your commercial transactions. America, when assessing the enemies of freedom, both foreign and domestic, the definition of terror itself must be re-examined. Are Americans who engage in non-violent, peaceful activities, like minting gold and silver coins for trade, economic terrorists? Or are those who advocate for war and destruction and printing worthless paper money to stimulate the economy the real economic terrorists? The answer is obvious. From New York, defending freedom every night of the week.